The clink of a wine glass can sound like a death knell. I remember the chill crawling up my spine, the way my fingers tightened around the linen napkin in my lap. 30 years, and he looked at me like a stranger as he raised his glass, not to me, but to her. That was the moment something inside me snapped, and something else was born. If you've ever given your life to someone who thought they could erase you with a smile, this story is for you. Subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're watching from. You'll want to see how this ends. They always dim the lights in those expensive restaurants. I guess to make you forget the price tags on the menu, or maybe to make betrayals easier to digest. I was staring at the flicker of the candle between us when he lifted his glass. Mark, my husband, my partner, my entire goddamn life for the past 30 years. To new beginnings, he said, smiling like the smug bastard he's always been. Only I hadn't seen it before. That smile used to mean love, safety, home. Now, it just meant war. Erin, seated just a little too close beside him, let out a breathy laugh and reached for her water. Her fingers grazed his arm like it was second nature. I caught the way she looked at him, the way her other hand settled protectively over her belly. "I'm pregnant," she said, eyes glinting. There was a pause. Not in the room. The waiter was still pouring wine. A couple nearby was laughing. But in me, something deep inside me twisted like it was being wrung out. Pregnant. Mark's eyes didn't flicker once toward me. He stayed locked on Erin. Proud, pleased, like he had just won a prize. I didn't cry, didn't scream. Instead, I smiled. Slow, small. The kind of smile that takes effort when your hands are shaking under the table. Because I already knew. I knew about the bank transfers, the business dinners that turned into hotel reservations, the way she had started calling him M in text messages that I wasn't supposed to see. I knew, and I had spent the last 6 weeks preparing. I lifted my glass too. To new beginnings, I said softly, my voice clear, steady, and venom-laced. Mark turned to me then, finally. That smugness faded a touch when he met my eyes. "I emptied the joint accounts this morning," I said, still smiling, froze the business assets, and filed for divorce. You could have heard a pin drop. The waiter blinked. Erin's mouth opened slightly, like a fish gasping for air. And Mark, for the first time in decades, looked truly, undeniably confused. "I hope you both enjoy your new beginning," I added, setting my napkin gently on the table. Then I stood. I remember every step I took away from that table, my heels tapping against the marble, the hostess blinking at me as I passed, the scent of marinara lingering in the air, the tiny mark on the carpet near the entrance where I had stood for our anniversary dinner the year before, waiting for him to arrive late, again. Funny the things your brain clings to. I walked out into the night, not as a woman falling apart, but as one finally waking up. And behind me, for once, it was Mark who had to explain something. I didn't go home, not the one we shared. I had a plan, a checklist. I wasn't the Helen Carter who had swallowed every insult, every dismissal, every "you just don't understand the business, sweetheart." That Helen had died the moment Erin touched her stomach and called it a miracle. No, this Helen was done waiting quietly while other people dictated her worth. The game was on, and I had just made the first move. The silence in the car was suffocating, not because of noise, there wasn't any, but because of memory. Every inch of that black leather interior reminded me of Mark, of us, of who I used to be. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than I needed to, my knuckles pale against the dark. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline, from rage, from 30 years of swallowing things I should have screamed. 30 years. I remember the first day we moved into our home in Pasadena, the way the morning sun hit the porch, the smell of paint still fresh on the kitchen walls. I made us coffee in a machine we couldn't afford. Mark kissed my cheek and said, "One day this place will be full of memories." He wasn't wrong, but none of those memories were mine. I gave him everything. I gave up my own dreams to build his. I was a damn good interior designer, had a few small clients back in. One of them was featured in Sunset magazine, but Mark said his business needed focus. "You're the rock," he told me. "You keep everything running." So I did. I managed the books before we could afford an accountant. I hosted the clients, smiled through endless dinners where I was introduced as Mark's wife and little else. And I believed that was love. I believed it because I had to. Because if it wasn't, then what the hell was all of this? The week after our 10th anniversary, I miscarried. I never told anyone, not even him. He was away on business, and I figured, why burden him with something already gone? I carried that alone, like so much else. Just like I carried the weight of a house, a marriage, a life that he barely showed up for. I pulled into the motel just outside Glendale. Not glamorous, but clean, efficient, anonymous. I had paid in cash that morning. The clerk didn't even look up when I asked for the key. Good. Inside the room, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let the tremors pass through me. My legs felt like jelly. My mouth was dry. My heart, it was hammering like I'd just escaped a burning building, because I had. The phone on the nightstand buzzed. Mark, missed calls. I didn't answer. I wouldn't. Not tonight. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had prepared. Labeled in neat black marker, contingency plan, HC, bank statements, asset transfer forms, power of attorney revocation, business contracts with my signature, and clauses he never bothered to read. I'd written those myself. Funny thing about being the silent partner. No one notices when you hold the pen. I opened the laptop and checked the wire transfer one more time. Clean. Timed perfectly. The business accounts were frozen under the emergency fraud clause I initiated with the bank that morning. Mark would wake up tomorrow to an empire in stasis. Untouchable. Useless to him without me. I stared at the screen, but I wasn't really seeing it. My brain drifted to that moment in the restaurant. Erin's smug little smirk. The way she rubbed her belly like it was some kind of trophy. My stomach churned. She was barely older than our goddaughter. Hell, she was supposed to be our goddaughter. And that's when the memory hit me like a freight train. It was Erin's 6th birthday. She had been so shy, hiding behind her mother's skirt. Mark had crouched down, handed her a pink bear and said, "She looks just like you did, Helen, at that age." I remember laughing, thinking it was sweet. Now that sentence tasted like bile in the back of my throat. My head began to throb. I closed the laptop, leaned back, and stared at the ceiling. One of those ugly motel ceilings with bumps like dried toothpaste. But at least it was mine. This room, this moment, this choice, I was alone. But for the first time in decades, that didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like power. The next move would take courage. I needed to look deeper into the finances, into Erin, into that contract I found with her name on it from 15 years ago. There was more under the surface. I could feel it. And I wasn't going to stop until I uncovered every filthy secret Mark Carter had buried. He thought I'd leave quietly. He had no idea who I had become. I was never the type to snoop. That's what I told myself every time I ignored the gut feeling. Every time I pushed away the discomfort gnawing at the edges of my sanity. But now I moved like a woman with nothing to lose. Because I didn't. It was a.m. when I unlocked the storage unit Mark never thought I'd remember. One of those anonymous cubes on the outskirts of town. Bare, fluorescent lit, silent except for the occasional rattle of distant pipes. The code hadn't changed. Of course it hadn't. He never expected I'd be the one using it. The key turned with a dry, metallic click. Inside, boxes, file drawers, a spare office chair with one leg taped. Mark always said it was his overflow. He treated it like a graveyard for old invoices and manuals, but I knew better now. I pulled on gloves. I'd watched enough crime dramas in the background while folding laundry to know, always wear gloves. Not for crime, for cleanliness, for detachment, for control. The first few boxes were useless. Tax folders from client intake forms, old brochures. But the 4th box down. Something was different. Newer folders, labeled in Erin's handwriting. She had bubbly round letters, little hearts over her E's. Of course she did. I flipped open one marked Consulting. Inside, copies of wire transfers, not from the business, from a personal account I didn't recognize. Payments made out to her. Thousands, monthly, regular, and each one signed by Mark. I took a photo with my phone, then another, and another. I kept digging, and that's when I saw it, buried in a manila envelope with no label. A contract, dated August. A consulting agreement for Erin Wallace, claimed she'd be advising on branding and investor relations. There was a clause, a very specific clause. In the event of dissolution of the firm or the incapacitation of a founding partner, Ms. Wallace will be entitled to a % equity stake, guaranteed. My blood turned to ice. 30%? That clause wasn't in any version I had drafted. Not one. I would have remembered. I did remember. I handled every legal update until anything after that, sure. But this was, I stared at the signature block. Helen Carter, co-founder. Mark Carter, CEO. Aaron Wallace, consultant. Except my name had been forged. Sloppily. The loop in the H was wrong. The angle on the C too sharp. I stepped back. My hands were sweating inside the gloves now. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. A roaring in my ears drowned out everything else. 15 years ago. 15 years ago, Mark gave that girl, barely out of college, a path into our company, into our lives, not just as a side fling. He was building a future with her. Back when I was still trying to get pregnant, I dropped onto the cold floor. My knees hit hard, the ache shooting up to my spine. But I didn't care, because that's when the last piece slid into place. He had never chosen me. Not once. He tolerated me, used me, kept me because I was useful, because I played the part and never looked too closely. And now that I was older, less appealing by his standards, easier to discard, he thought I'd go away like an old piece of furniture. But I wasn't furniture. I was fire. I stood, gathered the documents I needed, and walked out. The city was still asleep as I drove back toward the motel. I felt the weight of the folder in my lap like it was a weapon. And in a way, it was. The kind that wounds quietly, strategically, with no fingerprints. My phone buzzed again. Voicemail, new message. I didn't open it. Not yet. There was more to find, more strings to unravel. But now, for the first time, I had a thread that led straight to the core of the rot. Mark's world was built on lies, and I was going to be the woman who tore it all down. The first time I saw Aaron Wallace, she had chocolate on her face and a ribbon in her hair. She was 6, maybe 7, shy. Her mother, Karen, was one of those effortlessly charming women, always laughing too loudly, always touching your arm when she spoke. Mark said they were old college friends. She'd moved to Pasadena after a bad breakup and needed help settling in. Of course, we helped. That's what good people do, right? And Aaron was sweet, quiet. She used to sit on our couch, flipping through my design magazines, asking if she could have a house like that someday. I made her cocoa. I took her school shopping when Karen got the flu. She called me Aunt Helen, even though we weren't related. I loved that child who looked so much like me when I was her age. Too much, now that I think about it. The soft brown curls, the gap in her front teeth, the way her nose crinkled when she laughed. I should have seen it. God, I should have seen it. But I didn't. Not until I was sitting in my car outside the county clerk's office, staring at a copy of Aaron's birth certificate I had pulled after 3 hours of bureaucracy and polite lies. Mother, Karen Wallace. Father, Mark Edward Carter. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just sat there, my nails digging into the steering wheel, breathing in through my nose like I'd been trained to do in Lamaze class all those years ago, a class I'd taken alone. Mark was busy that day, busy making another family. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that filled the car, a sound that didn't belong to me, not the me I used to be, that Helen, the one who trusted, who believed, who bent without breaking, was already dead. This was a funeral now, and I wasn't mourning my marriage anymore. I was mourning me. My entire adult life had been wrapped around a lie with dimples and a giggle and big brown eyes. I raised my husband's daughter, not out of forgiveness or redemption, out of ignorance, out of faith. Mark let me hold that girl in my arms, let me buy her birthday gifts, let me believe we were doing something good, when all along he was laughing behind my back. And Erin? She knew. I saw it now. The looks, the small condescending tone she used with me in meetings once she joined the business, the way she called me Helen like it was a placeholder instead of a name. She had played along, waited in the wings. She had watched me give up my life piece by piece, and never said a word. And now she was pregnant, with the second child Mark never gave me. I drove to my sister's house that night. Linda didn't ask questions. She opened the door, handed me a glass of wine, and let me collapse on her couch. She knew something was coming. She always did. I need to show you something, I told her. I laid out the documents on her dining table, the forged contract, the bank transfers, the birth certificate. She stared, quiet, her jaw tight. This is criminal, she finally whispered. I shook my head. It's Mark. That's worse. No one ever believes you when it's someone like him. We sat in silence. The clock ticked. Her dog snored. Then Linda looked me in the eye. So what are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? Not if I'd do something. But what? I was done surviving. Now I would start strategizing. I leaned back in the chair and smiled for the first time in days. A cold, measured smile. I'm going to take everything he built and make him watch me do it. Because love didn't destroy me. He did. And now, I would be the one writing the ending. You don't really know yourself until you decide to burn everything down. The morning I filed the paperwork, the sky over Pasadena was an impossible blue. One of those crisp, cloudless California days that feels like it's daring you to stay angry. I walked into the courthouse at 8 a.m., heels clicking on tile, folder in hand, not a single strand of hair out of place. People looked at me like I was someone's assistant, a retiree, maybe a judge's wife. No one saw the grenade I was carrying. Divorce petition. Helen Carter, Veers Mark Edward Carter, emergency asset freeze application, signed and notarized corporate injunction, per clause, 14C of the founding agreement. His signature right there, back in, smug as ever. I had the power. I just needed to wield it. The clerk didn't blink. She stamped the documents, took my ID, handed me a receipt, and just like that, my 30-year marriage was officially unraveling, one legal stamp at a time. I walked out of that courthouse into the sun, heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear, from freedom. Back at the motel, I made 2 calls. First, to the bank. I confirmed the freeze on our joint accounts, business accounts, and the executive card I knew Erin had been using for her company dinners. Second, to Mark's lawyer. I didn't ask to speak to him. I left a message. This is Helen Carter. As of a.m. this morning, I've filed for divorce and enacted Clause 14C. Please advise your client to retain separate counsel. Oh, and tell him to check his wallet. He'll find it's lighter. Click. Then I waited. Didn't take long. At 1, my phone rang. Blocked number. I picked up and said nothing. Helen? His voice. God, that voice. I used to fall asleep to it, warm in our bed. Now it sounded like static. Where the hell are you? He snapped. I smiled. Someplace where I don't have to look at you. You froze the accounts. What are you thinking? Are you having some kind of breakdown? No, Mark. I'm finally having a breakthrough. Silence. I imagined him pacing, running a hand through his thinning hair, looking around that big house we built together, the house I designed, painted, filled with laughter, pain, silence. I have a child on the way, he hissed, like it was a threat. I almost laughed. Then I suggest you figure out how to support her, because the money's not coming from me. You can't do this. You don't know what you're doing. That did it. I dropped my voice low. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm taking back my life. Every dollar, every piece of dignity, every hour I spent shrinking so you could shine. Jesus, Helen, stop. No, you don't get to talk now. You had 30 years. I was loyal. I was quiet. I gave up everything. You gave me lies. You made me raise your child while you laughed behind my back. And now? Now you're going to learn what happens when the woman you underestimated decides she's done. I hung up, and I didn't cry. I packed my things from the motel, moved into a short-term rental in Glendale, something with clean lines, sunlight, and no memories. I bought new sheets, new towels, a coffee machine with just 1 cup, mine. Then I sat on the floor with a glass of wine and watched the sky turn from gold to dark, like someone had pulled a curtain over the world. And I breathed, not shallow, not anxious, free. For the first time in 3 decades, I didn't have to ask anyone if they wanted dinner, or worry if I'd used the wrong tone at some business function, or tiptoe around a man whose ego filled every room. That night, I slept like a woman who had just burned her prison to the ground. And when I woke up, I was already thinking about my next move. The first headline hit 2 days later. Pasadena power couple, in shock divorce, financial freeze raises eyebrows. I was brushing my teeth when I saw it. The toothpaste foamed in my mouth, bitter and minty, as I stared at my face on the screen, grainy, cropped from some charity gala years ago. Standing beside Mark, smiling, holding a glass of champagne. I spit. The article was polite at first, measured, speculative, but the words unconfirmed allegations of financial misconduct practically leapt off the screen. That was all it took. The floodgates opened. By noon, 5 more outlets had picked it up. By evening, a local podcast ran an emergency episode with a clickbait title, The Fall of Mark Carter, Divorce, Deceit, and a Mysterious Frozen Fortune. They had no idea. Not yet. But they would. I watched it all unfold from my rental, wrapped in a navy robe, sipping bitter coffee from a chipped mug that felt more honest than any of the expensive crystal I used to wash by hand. The comments were brutal, speculative, hateful. Most of them aimed at me. She finally snapped. She's jealous. Bet she's bitter because the new girl's younger. I closed the laptop. It wasn't worth it. I'd lived under the weight of people's opinions long enough. Now they could think what they wanted, while I handled the facts. I wasn't bitter. I was brilliant. And the best part? They hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. That came later, when someone, I don't know who and I don't care, leaked the internal memos, emails, bank records. It was all there. Mark's double billing, the silent payments, the expenses marked consulting that led straight to Aaron's personal Venmo, the suite in Manhattan paid for with business funds, the 2 first-class flights under fake client names, one of them hers. The documents were anonymously submitted to a journalist I had quietly reached out to 2 weeks earlier. Her name was Danielle Griggs, local, smart, no nonsense. I handed her truth in a tidy envelope. She turned it into fire. The headline that changed everything dropped on a Thursday morning. Inside the Empire, Mark Carter's web of lies and the woman who brought him down. This time, the photo was just me, standing alone outside the courthouse, sunglasses on, chin up, and the public, they flipped. Suddenly I wasn't the crazy wife. I was the hero, the woman who saw through the lies, the woman who fought back, the woman who did what no one else dared. Ex-employees started coming forward. Quiet messages turned into loud statements. He made me sign NDAs. He took credit for everything Helen designed. She ran that company, not him. I didn't respond to any of them. Not publicly. Not yet. But the tide had turned. Mark tried to fight it. Of course he did. He went on camera with some tired press release and a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She's unstable, Mark said. She's retaliating. That night, I got a message from an old friend I hadn't heard from in years. Unstable? You mean unshakable? I'm so proud of you. And then another. Finally, someone shut that arrogant bastard down. Erin vanished from social media within hours. Her LinkedIn quietly updated to seeking new opportunities. Her friends deleted old posts. Her influencer account, gone. I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered her at the dinner table, hand on her belly, eyes glittering, smirk curling the corner of her mouth. She knew, and she wanted me to sit there, to accept it, to vanish quietly while they built their new beginning. No, not this time. They didn't get to write the ending. I did, and I was just getting started. Silence can be the loudest sound in the world. I hadn't spoken to Mark since the call after the asset freeze. He didn't try again. No apology, no explanation, just silence. But the world was anything but quiet. 3 weeks after Danielle's exposé, the real flood began. A woman named Lisa Hartman emailed me. Subject line, I used to work for him too. Then another, then 5 more, then 32. Receptionists, interns, accountants, women, men. People who had walked away from Carter & Co. with shame in their throats and silence on their lips. Until now. They'd been mocked, gaslit, undermined, passed over for promotions after doing all the work. One woman had her designs sold to a client under Mark's name. Another found Erin wearing the necklace her grandmother had made, the one she lost at the company retreat. Story after story. Abuse didn't always come with bruises. Sometimes it came with a smile and a bonus check. Oh, less than promised. Danielle wanted to run a follow-up piece. But this time, she didn't want anonymous sources. She wanted me. No camera, I told her. Not yet. She agreed. We met at a cafe in Silver Lake, small enough to be invisible. She wore jeans and a leather jacket. I wore the calm of a woman who had walked through fire barefoot. Her recorder sat between us. Why now? She asked. I stared at the steam rising from my tea. Earl Grey, no sugar. Because I was tired of being erased, I said. We talked for 2 hours. I told her everything, except the things I still needed to keep close. Some knives stay sharper when hidden. When the second article dropped, it didn't just trend. It roared. Helen Carter speaks. a legacy built on silence, and the woman who refused to stay quiet. They used a photo of me walking into the courthouse this time, alone, determined, no sunglasses, no fear. I was done hiding. That week, I received an email from a woman named Ava Klein, lawyer, Harvard, fierce. She had been following my story, and she had an idea. "We start a foundation," she said, "for women rebuilding their lives after financial and emotional abuse. We call it the Carter Clause, and we make sure no woman signs her name away again without knowing exactly what it means." I said yes. I didn't even blink. We launched with a GoFundMe that hit pause in hours. CBS called, then NPR. Then someone from Netflix left a voicemail I still haven't returned. Mark's response? A pathetic attempt at a countersuit. Defamation, emotional distress, loss of business reputation. The judge tossed it in less than 10 minutes. Turns out when you have proof, emails, contracts, signatures, it's hard to argue with the truth. His last ally, a corporate partner named Greg Tolliver, issued a public statement distancing himself from Mr. Carter's conduct. Translation? He saw the ship sinking and grabbed the last lifeboat. Erin tried to resurface with a tweet about healing and protecting her peace. It was ratioed into oblivion. People had seen enough. They had heard enough. And now they were listening to me. Not the wife, not the accessory, not the shadow in the room. Me, Helen Carter, the woman no one saw coming, and the woman who would never be invisible again. She died believing I would be taken care of. Eleanor Carter, Mark's mother, wasn't perfect, but she treated me with something resembling affection, the old-school, apron-wearing kind. She sent me handwritten birthday cards every year, even when Mark forgot. She taught me how to make her lemon bars from scratch, called me her girl, and hugged me tighter than my own mother ever had. She also died 2 months before the divorce. Mark said she left everything to him, to keep things simple. I didn't question it then. I was still clinging to scraps of trust, still hoping I was wrong. I wasn't. The call came from her attorney, Mr. Arlo Finch, a man who looked like he'd been cut from granite and never heard of smiling. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter," he said, then paused. "I suppose it's Ms. now." "Just Helen," I told him. He hesitated. "There's something you should see. I'm sending over the original will and the amended version Mark brought in 6 weeks before Eleanor's passing." I sat in my new apartment, hands clenched around a mug of chamomile tea that had long gone cold. As I read both documents side by side, the original left % of her estate to me, a vacation cottage in Mendocino, her jewelry, her Buick Riviera that she never let Mark touch. The amendment left everything to Mark, every last cent. Signed by Eleanor in shaky cursive that didn't match any of her previous signatures. Mark had power of attorney, medical, financial. I'd been in the hospital room the day before she passed. She was lucid. She told me she was proud of me. She said, "You were always the steady one, Helen. He never deserved you." She hugged me. And 6 weeks before that moment, he erased me. I dropped the papers. I couldn't breathe. How do you mourn someone twice? First when they die, then when you realize they were used against you. I called Arlo. "This signature," I said. "You've seen it. You know it's not hers." Silence. Then, "I can't say it officially, but I agree with you. Can anything be done?" A pause. Longer this time. "No, not now. Not without years of litigation. And with the statute of limitations and Mark's legal protections." He trailed off. "I'm sorry." I hung up, and I screamed. A deep guttural sound I didn't know I had in me. It tore through the walls of my small apartment. My voice cracked halfway through. I slumped to the floor and cried like I hadn't cried in years. Not over Mark, not over money, over Eleanor. She loved me, and he took that too. But something changed that night, something vital. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about justice, about truth, about every woman who's been erased, silenced, overwritten by a man with a bigger voice and a better tailor. I stood up. My face was swollen. My heart ached, but I was clear. Mark had stolen everything, but I still had my voice. And now, I was going to use it to make sure no one else ever lost theirs again. Justice doesn't come in a blaze of glory. It comes in paperwork, in deadlines, in the cold, precise language of people who have seen too many lies to flinch anymore. It was a Tuesday when I walked into the office of Cheryl Kim, a forensic accountant with a reputation for unraveling financial knots like they were shoelaces. Her desk was spotless, her blouse crisp. She didn't ask if I wanted water. She asked for evidence. I handed over 2 flash drives and a folder labeled Personal Hell Volume. "Mark Carter," I said. "Let's see what he's really worth." She started working before I even finished the sentence. For weeks, we dug, quietly, carefully. We found shell companies, misreported earnings, undisclosed payments masked as charitable donations, private expenses charged to corporate accounts, luxury hotel stays, jewelry, a double-A, massage chair for Aaron's condo in Manhattan. He thought I wouldn't notice. He forgot I used to balance those books. Cheryl's final report was a bomb in a manila envelope. I sent it to the IRS with no fanfare. No note, no need. 3 weeks later, Mark Carter received a federal audit notice, and the silence that followed was delicious. The headlines came next. Feds launch probe into Carter & Co. Fraud allegations surface. From boardroom to courtroom. Mark Carter, under investigation. He tried to call me. Of course he did. Blocked. Then came the text. 1 sentence. "We could have handled this privately." I read it twice, then deleted it. Privately? He slept with a woman half my age, forged my name, rewrote my life, and erased me from his mother's will. There would be nothing private about this anymore. Erin, for her part, had gone quiet. Her influencer account was gone. The last I heard, she'd been let go from her consulting role after the audit froze the firm's payroll. She posted something vague on Instagram stories once. Black background, white letters. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find your truth." I screenshotted it. Because this was my truth. I had been a ghost in my own life. But now, I was the storm. Clients pulled out. Mark's speaking engagements were canceled. Investors withdrew. His name was poison in every email thread. And me? I was still angry. Still hollow in some places, still waking up in the middle of the night remembering the way he used to touch the small of my back in public like I was something to show off. But I was also standing taller. I drank my coffee slower. I walked down the street like I had every right to exist, because I did. I sat in a bookstore one afternoon, flipping through a memoir by a woman who'd left her husband after 35 years. The last line read, "They said I was broken, but they didn't realize I was breaking free." I closed the book and smiled, because I wasn't broken, not anymore. And the man who thought he could break me? He was the one being slowly, methodically dismantled, one truth at a time. Revenge is loud, but freedom is quiet. It was a Tuesday. No headlines that day, no lawsuits, no leaked emails, just the hum of my neighbor's lawnmower and the smell of fresh-cut grass drifting through my window. I was sitting at the kitchen table, my kitchen table. A simple one, solid oak, bought with my money, chosen for no one's taste but mine. The sunlight fell across it just right, and for a second, everything felt still. And that's when it hit me. It was over. Not in the dramatic, courtroom gavel kind of way, but in the quiet realization that I no longer woke up wondering where he was. I no longer scrolled through articles to see if my name had been dragged through the mud again. There was no Erin posting beach photos, no Mark pretending to be the victim, no calls from lawyers, just silence. And I didn't hate it. I didn't love it either. Not yet, but I was learning how to live in it. That afternoon, I walked down to the little cafe around the corner. It was the kind of place I would have skipped before, too casual, too small. Mark hated anything that didn't have valet parking and overpriced espresso. But now it was mine. The barista, a young man with tired eyes and a kind smile, recognized me. "You're Helen, right?" I hesitated. "Yes." He handed me my latte. "You're kind of a legend around here." I didn't know what to say. Then, as I turned to leave, a woman at the corner table waved me over. Late 40s, curly gray-streaked hair, tapping away at a laptop. "Sorry," she said. "I don't mean to intrude, but I'm with Reclaim Project. We help women over restart after divorce, financial abuse, things like that." She paused, then smiled. "We've been following your story. Would you ever consider speaking at one of our events?" My mouth went dry. I had nothing prepared, no speech. No platform, no fake smile to put on. And for once, I didn't need one. I just said, yes, not for them, not for some performance, for me. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about Mark, or Erin, or even Eleanor's will. It became about the version of me that never had a voice, the version who stayed quiet so people would like her, who made herself smaller so others could shine, who stood in the background of every photo of her own life. Not anymore. I walked home with a flyer in my purse and a strange new feeling growing in my chest. Not anger, not grief, purpose. That night I opened my laptop. I didn't check the news. I didn't Google Mark. I opened a blank document. Title, The Woman You Forgot to Fear. I started typing, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't feel like I was telling someone else's story. I was finally telling mine. The first time I held my book in my hands, I cried. Not a dramatic, movie scene kind of cry. No soundtrack, no arms around me. Just tears, quiet and warm, slipping down my cheeks in the middle of my living room, under a dusty beam of afternoon light. The title gleamed in black serif font, The Woman No One Saw, by Helen Carter. 267 pages of pain, clarity, and cold truth. It wasn't just a memoir. It was a warning, a mirror, a flare in the dark for any woman who had ever been told to calm down, to let it go, to be grateful. I had written it over 6 brutal months, late nights, early mornings. Every chapter dragged pieces of me into the light, some that I didn't even know I'd buried. I bled into those pages, and I refused to clean it up. The day it hit Amazon, it sold out in 3 hours. Then the emails came, from strangers, from survivors, from daughters who watched their mothers go silent, from women who had become their mothers, from men, even, quiet, ashamed, repentant. Your book saved my sister. I left him. I took my kids, and I left. You made me believe in myself again. Mark sent a cease and desist within hours. His lawyer claimed it was character defamation, said I misrepresented events, weaponized emotional narrative, and caused irreparable damage to his reputation. My response? I posted the cease and desist letter on my website, with a single-line caption, "Here's what silence looks like when it's scared." The public turned feral. The backlash was swift. The hashtag #WeSeeHelen trended for 3 days. I didn't ask for it. I didn't organize it. But it found me. And Erin? She tried one last grasp at sympathy. A blog post. Long, rambling, about grief and being misled and finding herself in an impossible situation. It was deleted within the hour. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Mark dropped the lawsuit, quietly, without comment. His law firm removed his name from the masthead. His former clients? Gone. He still had money. But no one wanted to sit next to him anymore. At one event, a woman approached me with a hardcover copy of the book and eyes that had clearly seen too much. She held it out to be signed, then said, "You didn't just survive him, you outlived his shadow." And that's when I knew. This wasn't revenge. This was resurrection. I had taken everything he tried to erase and carved it into permanence. Not in court, not in fire, but in ink. And nothing he did now could unwrite me. The Pacific is a strange kind of blue in April. Deeper, moodier. The kind of blue that feels like it could swallow you whole if you let it. I stood on the shore of Santa Monica, my toes dug into the cool sand, the wind tugging gently at my scarf. The exact same date, April 10th. 31 years ago, Mark and I toasted our first anniversary at a little seafood place up the road. He'd bought me a necklace I later learned he'd charged to a company card. I wore it anyway. Today I wore nothing but myself. No jewelry, no makeup, no performance, just me. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I didn't check it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to come back from this moment. The waves whispered, each one carrying away a version of me I no longer needed. The woman who apologized for speaking up. The woman who measured her worth in someone else's comfort. The woman who mistook survival for peace. Gone. In her place, someone quiet, clear, steel-backed. I had spent so long bracing for impact, waiting for the next lie, the next betrayal, the next wave to drag me under. But now, the storm had passed. Mark? Last I heard, he was consulting, a fancy word for unemployed with excuses. Erin had moved to Denver. Word was she took the baby with her. No more designer purses, no more brand deals, just a woman holding the wreckage of a castle built on someone else's foundation. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't need to, because hate keeps you tethered, and I was finally untethered. I reached into my coat and pulled out my phone. One new voicemail. Hi, Helen. This is Andrea from Beacon Publishing. We're excited about the sales numbers for The Woman No One Saw. We want to talk to you about a second book, maybe even a series. Let us know if you're open. I smiled, not because of the offer, because they saw me, really saw me. I closed the phone, slid it back into my pocket, and stared at the horizon. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't belong to anyone. Not to a husband, not to a story, not to a legacy I didn't choose. I belonged to me, and the silence around me? It wasn't loneliness, it was peace. I turned, walking away from the water, one steady step at a time. Whatever came next, it would be mine, all of it. And this time, I would write the story myself. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.